After watching Mr. Roberts, I got curious about what exactly an ensign is, which is Jack Lemmon's rank. Apparently it's a commissioned officer of the lowest rank in the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard, ranking above Chief Warrant Officer and below Lieutenant. But it's all about being a commissioned officer, I guess. That seems to be a big deal in the military, that commissioned stuff, non-commissioned, all that. Look, this rank stuff is over my head, but I do know how to promote our sponsor. So let me awkwardly clunk gears. Oh my God, I need some transmission fluid. And tell you that when you're talking about a fine brew, Sparkplug Coffee sells a drink that's the model of convenience and affordability. They offer premium quality beans, which will help you whip up the best coffee you've ever made. It's cheaper and tastier than takeout, and my fellow Canadians will get it shipped to them for free. Americans can get their shipments in a timely fashion too, but they will have to pony up for the delivery costs. And keep it coming by signing up for Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. You can quit or even just pause if the need crops up. For example, when you're sent out to sea with your fellow sailors and seamen, you aren't going to be able to bring your old bag of beans in from the front porch. So pause your membership until they discharge you, and you get to go home where you won't get killed by a suicide bomber while drinking coffee with a coworker. True story in this movie. The website you should give a try is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. That HYES jazz will allow you to enjoy a one-time 20% discount. And you don't have to be a brand new member to put that HYES into the box. If you're a longtime member and have never used that code, do it next time you order. A friend of mine at work, I told him all about it. He'd been ordering for years. He didn't even know he could save 20%. So brew it the best. Brew with Sparkplug Coffee. Okay then. Now hear this. Now hear this. The time has come to talk about the movie of the day. Get your salute in hand ready as I call action. Have you ever seen Mr. Roberts? Well, hello, movie fans, and thank you for opening your ears to the 676th edition of Have You Ever Seen? We review classic movies on this channel, and we spoil them thoroughly, only today it won't be a husband and wife team, as it normally is. This is Bev's week off, so you've got just me this time. And I'm Ryan Ellis, not an ensign, nor a lieutenant, nor a captain, nor a doctor. I just work in television, and I do this movie podcasting thing as a hobby. And you don't even have to call me mister. Bev and I covered Airplane last week, so a month of funny films continues today as I ramble on about Mr. Roberts, which was released by Warner Brothers 70 years ago on July 30th, 1955. It really succeeded. Lady and the Tramp was easily number one at the box office that year, but this extravaganza was number two. The 7-Year Itch, the Monroe movie, which we will be covering at the end of the month, was a hit in its own right. It was 11th. So to briefly set up the plot, what we have here is a John Ford motion picture, although he shared directing duties with Mervyn LeRoy and Joshua Logan. More on that later. Henry Fonda stars in the titular role. It's the titular role! The always thinking of his men first lieutenant on a boat captained by a crabby James Cagney. Roberts has had enough of serving under such a jerk, and he's also fed up having to settle for being on this crappy cargo ship. He wants bigger things. He wants, in fact, to get assigned to a destroyer and get into combat. William Powell is the ship's doctor, and a young Jack Lemmon charismas all over the place as Ensign Frank Pulver. Have you ever charismaed? Hijinks! They do ensue, although there's always that serious underpinning of Roberts having to do battle with Captain Morton, and we're in the middle of World War II. That's pretty serious. Or, in a nutshell, responsibility sucks. Heavy as the head that wears the cargo-loading baseball cap. Okay, let's talk about the Rotten Tomatoes reviews, the tomatoes. The critics on that site say very nice things about this one. 93% of them hoist their thumbs in an upward position. 25 of them say it's good, while only 2 don't agree. And it's at 84% on the popcorn meter. And yes, this was also a big financial success. Wiki has it costing a little over $2 million, but raking in over $21 million. And don't forget, that is in 1955 dollars. The Robbie Robs was up for 3 Academy Awards, Best Picture, Best Sound, and Jack Lemmon won his first Oscar for playing Ensign Pulver. That was for Best Supporting Actor. Then he won Best Actor, Leading Actor, 18 years later for Save the Tiger. Jack won no other awards for this performance, by the way. He lost Best Foreign Actor at the BAFTAs to Ernest Borgnine in Marty, for instance. Of course, that's a leading performance, and this isn't, but anyway. And it's curious that John Ford and Mervyn LeRoy shared a Directors Guild nomination, and yet not an Oscar nomination. And Frank Nugent and Joshua Logan won the Writers Guild Award for Best Written American Comedy, but there was no Oscar nomination for them either. I watched Lemon's acceptance speech. He ran up on stage after Eva Marie Saint called his name. She'd won the year before for On the Waterfront. He kissed her, thanked a few people, although nobody by name, including the directors or his co-stars, and that was that. His whole speech didn't last 20 seconds. If you don't hear any bubbles anymore, I just moved my drink. Maybe you didn't hear him anyway. This motion picture didn't rank on any AFI lists, but it was at least nominated for 3 of them. The Top 100 Laughs, the Top 100 Quotes, and the 1998 AFI Top 100, so the greatest movies of all time, although not the 2007 edition. I'm a little surprised it wasn't amongst the 400 nominees that second time. The line they thought prudent to be one of the 400 greatest quotes of all time was Jack Lemmon saying, "Captain, it is I, Ensign Pulver, and I just threw your stinking palm tree overboard. Now what's all this crud about no movie tonight?" Oh, and one last big kudo, personal one here. I looked at my files, and I have this as my number 1 flick of 1955, even ahead of Night of the Hunter and Kiss Me Deadly. I didn't do a top 10 that year, just a top 3, but The 7-Year Itch, Marty, and Rebel Without a Cause would rank somewhere if I stretched it to 10. If I redid that list, by the way, I would have to put Night of the Hunter ahead of Mr. Roberts, even though I do still really enjoy this motion picture. I had a good time watching it. And we're going to cover The 7-Year Itch very soon, which I'm looking forward to seeing again. We haven't watched it in, maybe 10 or 11 years. Maybe I'll like it even more than I like this. Well, that's the list of awards and other achievements. Let's see why all those people rave so much and what brought so many people out to see it on the big screen 70 years ago. The days of World War II are waning, and we're in the Pacific Ocean on the Reluctant, a ship that doesn't do any fighting. It provides cargo for other boats. We begin the early morning with the sight of the ship's executive officer, Lieutenant Doug Roberts, who uses his trusty binoculars to spy on a huge battleship passing by in the distance. Lieutenant Doug. Magic legs. The whole movie, magic binoculars. The whole movie is about how badly he wants to be on that ship rather than spending time on the Reluctant, or the bucket, as the guys call it. Why would you want that bucket of bolts? Then we get the opening credits, where Fonda shares a title card with Cagney. Then Powell shares the next one with Lemmon. Some Weisenheimer put a cigarette butt in the dirt of the captain's prized palm tree, so the punishment is there will be no movie tonight. He's proud of this little tree, exorbitantly proud of that tree, that's stuck in a pot on the deck. All by itself, it looks a little weird. Of course, that's part of the point. It's supposed to be funny. So naturally, the crew decides to mess with him about it by doing things like extinguishing their cigarettes in the dirt. Doc sits down with Doug, and they talk about how he knows the men are going to pretend to be too sick to work that day because they have a big, hard day of shiploading ahead of them. And they talk about how Ensign Pulver is a big talking character who, after getting a few sips of booze in him, tells tales about the things he's done, and the women he's, let's say, known. Doug is discouraged, though, when he tells Doc about how he watched all those destroyers go by and how he feels like he should be working with those guys, doing real war stuff. Although one thing I got thinking about whenever Fonda would rag on having to do this job is that scene in The West Wing when Martin Sheen yells at God in the church. Sheen talks about how a tender ship, which doesn't do any fighting, just delivers mail and supplies and takes care of the other ships, was wiped out by a bad storm at sea, and I think everybody on board died. So Sheen, as the president's mad. Why would you kill those people? And the point is, we need people to do jobs like this, so the ones who are doing the fighting are able to do their job. Everybody has a role to play in a war, which I guess is a subtext in this movie, too. The war was only over for about 10 years at this point. Anyway, Doug has written a letter to the captain to try to get himself transferred, but Captain Morton won't allow it. He always blocks Doug from leaving the bucket because he keeps on trying to do that, which is actually a compliment the captain will never actually say out loud. You're really good at your job, and I need you, you dirty rat. I don't think I can do Cagney at all. I tried, but you dirty rat. Ward Bond plays Chief Dowdy, who talks to his lieutenant about getting the men some liberty because they haven't been off the boat for over a year. Doug keeps asking, but Cappy keeps saying no. Meantime, appropriate for a comedy, we get a comedy beat when Doc is right. All the men who want to get out of loading the ship pretend to be too ill to work. Pain in the appendix, a bad headache. But it's all a lie. So he hands them an aspirin or two, and they're all marked for duty. And then they do their own spying with binoculars that day. We saw Doug doing it, now they're doing it. Only they're not horny for being on another ship, like Doug is. They're horny for the sight of a bunch of nurses on a nearby island, while they shower and do other bathroom things. The nurses do, not the guys. Ages badly? Yep. 70 years ago, this was pure comedy. But the captain puts a stop to it when he comes on deck and interrupts all the ogling, although he doesn't actually do anything about it. After they go back to scrubbing the deck like they're supposed to, he moves along and doesn't reprimand them for all that loafing, which is surprising because he likes to give these guys grief all the time, and now they were not really doing their job. So then again, I think part of the point here is that he's pretty bad at his job. Because they're so strung out and fed up, though, a fight breaks out, which Doug has to wade into and stop. I like the touch that Fonda's armpits are just bathed in sweat after that. He was already hot, but now he's awash. I'm sure it's hot on deck to begin with, well, obviously, but he just exerted himself during a brawl, so he looks like I do after one of my softball games. And I watched this movie only a day or two after that brutal June heatwave we had, right around the official start of summer, when I couldn't so much as breathe without being lathered in sweat. It's 20 minutes in before we finally get some Pulver, but here he is, as he joins Roberts when they go ashore. Doug has a job to do, but Frank is there to find the ladies we were just talking about, one of whom is Lieutenant Anne Gerard, who's played by Betsy Palmer. Betsy Palmer, know that name? Recognize that one? She was Jason's mother in the original Friday the 13th. Kill her, Mommy! Kill her! I'll talk more about her career later on. Anyway, all these women think Frank's the captain, and he doesn't disavow them of that notion, but his big goal is to try to make a date with Anne. And it's looking good, so Pulver goes back to the quarters he shares with Doug and searches for Doug's hidden bottle of scotch. The LT has been saving it to celebrate if and when he gets transferred, but Frank wants it to get in good with Annie. But the bottle's gone, we'll find out why later, and so Doug feels obliged to help out the ensign with his rendezvous with the lady lieutenant. So he and the doc team up to fake a bottle of scotch, complete with some iodine for taste, quote-unquote, and a little bit of Coke for color. They even throw in some hair tonic to age the stuff. Yeah, sounds about right. Frank is grateful for how they just helped him out, but then in a clunky transition, he just flat out asks Doug what he thinks of him. The answer? He's a real likable guy, but he's also the most hapless, lazy, disorganized, and in general the most lecherous person he's ever known in his life. Frank gets worked up about that, but only objects to the part about being disorganized, which reminded me of The Empire Strikes Back, when Han Solo hears from Princess Leia that he's a stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerve herder. And all he takes issue with is the scruffy-looking part. Who's scruffy-looking? But yeah, Frank never finishes anything he starts. He doesn't read books that Doug gives him, and he isn't exactly acing it as the laundry and morale officer. I guess he sleeps most of the day away. Now that I envy. Okay, most of all, Roberts calls Pulver out for how he talks a big game about pranking the captain or telling him off, but never follows through. He completely avoids the man, in fact. He's scared of him. Morton somehow doesn't even know he exists. But as an example, he was going to put marbles above the captain's bunk to drive him crazy when he sleeps, only he hasn't done that either. Doug claims he'll respect him if he ever does put those marbles in the overhead, and also admit to the captain that he's the one who did it. There's some pretty good setup and payoff in this story, and spoiler alert about the end of the movie, so spoiler, but Frank will do something to cheese off Morton, and he'll own up to it too. Well, we'll get there. This long scene continues as Frank reveals that he doesn't want Doug to send his transfer me letter to the upper brass because he's worried he'll get killed if he ends up on a warship. Doc agrees with Frank about that, at least, and gets on the lieutenant about how he was in medical school before the war and should have stuck with that. But Doug wants to ante up and get in the fight. He could save lives with stethoscopes and examinations, yeah, but he'd rather get his hands on machine guns and cannons. We also get a preview of the very end of the movie when Pulver tells the doc, after Doug leaves the room, that he's built a firecracker that he's going to throw into the captain's bunk, then to rip open the door and announce, "It is I, Ensign Pulver!" This scene between Fonda, Lemmon, and Powell is really good. These guys are pretty great together, good chemistry, and I like how often Ford, or maybe LeRoy, or maybe Logan, did parts of this in long oneers. Okay, it's not that impressive, I guess, when the camera doesn't move so much like it does in Cuarón or Iñárritu oneers, but Ford or LeRoy or Logan let the actors play the scene like they would if it was still on stage. There's a lot of dialogue and plot development in this sequence, and apart from that clunky bit where Frank asks Doug, "What do you really think of me?" it flows well. So Doug gets back to work, defying the captain by letting the men take their shirts off because they're just roasting while working below decks. Going shirtless is something the captain got angry about just a few scenes ago, so we know this isn't going to end well. And Morton is even angrier about Roberts' transfer letter since it mentions disharmony on the ship, because that looks bad in the captain, of course. Cagney recalls his gangster roots here, barely containing his little man rage. "Mister, you ain't never gonna get off this ship!" And when he finally notices the men are shirtless, he gets all worked up about that and wants to put them all on report. But Doug tells him it was his idea. He can't get them in trouble when they had permission. Oh, and Doug also gave the men on some other boat a few crates of oranges. They haven't had fresh fruit in a long time, which ups Cap's fury even more. As punishment for all, let him get scurvy. It's fine, it's a war. Let him get scurvy. I want those oranges. As punishment for all this, Doug is supposed to spend 10 days confined to his quarters, or is it 20? But another boat is coming by for supplies, and the captain remembers his XO is good at this job, so he demands, "Get back to work!" Pulver stumbles across this tense scene and immediately kisses up to the captain, rather than say or do any of the things he just claimed he would say and do. And I guess Pulver's doing a satisfactory job in the laundry because the captain seems impressed with the condition of the clothes, although go easier on the starch in my pajamas. And he even likes how the ensign salutes, which I guess no one else ever does. I guess Jackie Boy is not a dirty rat. If you want to know what the Mr. Roberts character is in a nutshell, it's when he goes below decks and comes across the guys telling the story of what just happened, when Doug stood up to the captain and made him look stupid. But he didn't actually say anything that would get him in real trouble. He will later. What stands out, though, is how casual they are with him. They're comfortable, not afraid they'll get in trouble for not being prim and proper and obedient to their lieutenant. This is leadership, knowing what the people underneath you will respond to the best. That's how you get their best work, not berating them. Of course, this boat seems to be filled with screw-ups, and maybe Doug should demand a little more discipline, but I guess they always come through when they really have to. Now hear this! Now hear this! The men who haven't been in any kind of trouble lately are allowed to swim for 10 minutes. And I'll let you swim for 10 minutes. And I got thinking about this here. It must be torture to be on a boat in the South Pacific and have to be so hot working all day. You're surrounded by comfortable water. You know it's not going to be cold. It's the South Pacific. And you're dying in that heat, but you can't cool off unless the captain gives you permission. Or I guess maybe Roberts. And even a nicer captain than Morton can't let you just go swimming 3 or 4 times a day. There is work to do, and it is a war. The girls from that island come aboard the Bucket at this point and continue to mistake Frank as being a higher-ranking officer than he really is. Doug, showing how good a friend and leader he is, again, plays ball and tells the women that he's the laundry and morale officer, not Frank's superior. Pulver shows them around the ship and continues his big shottery, which most of the other seamen barely tolerate. But the tour doesn't last that long and the women have to go, announcing they'll be putting curtains up in the bathroom when they go back, which depresses the crew. Why these women didn't realize they should have had curtains up already is beyond me. We get an important development when Doug reads the men some orders, finding out that a port they're headed for will be a tropical paradise. Women, alcohol, fun, games. They cannot wait. These guys would probably be happy to go to Antarctica and spend time with the penguins at this point, but this sounds like it's going to be great. The natives on that island board the Bucket when they get there, and everybody's grinning ear to ear, including Doug, as they're loaded up with leis. But guess who reigns on that parade? The captain makes them all get off his vessel, most of them doing that by just diving off the deck. And even though most of the fellows get dressed up to go ashore and have some fun, the captain comes over the intercom and announces that nobody is going to get liberty. Roberts immediately barges into the top man's room and demands he let the crew have some me time, but now we find out why they're at that port in the first place. Doug gave the guy who assigns these things that bottle of scotch Frank was looking for and said it was compliments of the captain. Old Dougie was once again looking out for his guys, not keeping that booze for himself after all. And the captain found out about it and said, no! He tells Doug that he's going to be full commander one day, not just a lieutenant commander. He even bought the hat. But he owns up to show how his boss was impressed with his cargo officer. He got the palm tree, too, because of Roberts and the men's work. So Doug has made himself too valuable. And so no more letters and no more trying to get off this boat. Of course, no more standing up to him and beaking off either. So he agrees or no shore leave for the crew. It's a real awful thing to do, but Morton has to know he'll get his way with this. If you're going to blackmail somebody, make sure the guy will have no choice but to bite. They get into a pretty fierce argument about it, and Doug says things that could get him court-martialed for insubordination. Cap reveals a lot about himself here, though, as he talks about how he hates college boys like Roberts, because they always talked down to him when he was young and treated him like lesser than. So this is Stephen Miller stuff. You'll all pay for when I was picked last in soccer when I was a kid. Especially with immigrants. Doug gives his word that he won't write any more get-me-out-of-here letters, and he won't talk back in front of the crew again. And he can't tell anyone about this deal either. Don't forget, you're here forever. And Doug is destroyed about it, but he has to get the men some shore time, so he agrees. And off they all go to get blotto drunk and, presumably, enjoy the company of as many local ladies as possible. And they make the most of the party because some of them are brought back to the deck in a big net. They're so fall-down drunk they have to be deposited on deck, and they just lay there. Others are drunk too, but are able to walk at least, even though they're a little bloody and bruised because they got into a fight with some Army guys. And I guess our Navy guys won. The Navy always takes heat for being the wimpy side of the armed forces, but these gents in the Bucket don't fit that stereotype. They're scrappers, and I guess they're pretty tough. And Doug even allows them to clean up and head right back ashore to get into some more tomfoolery. Doug tells Doc he's happy that the 62 guys getting to unwind like this just might get them through the slog of the months ahead. He doesn't announce, of course, that he isn't allowed to go out and enjoy himself with Doc. He's not permitted to because of that deal, although we see Frank come back on board during this conversation with a sly grin, suggesting he did some lovin' and some leavin'. The insanity continues, though, and they are all so crazy in town that they got kicked out of port, which the furious captain announces when he storms back aboard the next morning. Whatever he was doing in town. He does come from the town. This is the red letter comedy sequence in the movie, and it's fine, although it didn't make me laugh. It was a little goofy, actually, without enough payoff for me. Well, there was lots of payoff, but I just didn't think it was all that funny. That bit where the guy motorcycles off the dock and down into the water probably busted guts 70 years ago. It just seems a little stupid now. You're that drunk? Somebody could have been killed. Everybody gets back on board before the ship pulls out and they set sail again, with the captain still angry they got kicked out of port. One guy barely made it. He had to run aboard as the boat was pulling away from the dock. So they're going to move cargo and work harder than... I'm not going to do Cagney. They're going to move cargo and work harder than they ever thought possible. And because he's got Doug over a barrel, the captain gives him orders he has to follow and not push back like he normally would. And it gets worse for Doug when he finds out that the Navy desperately needs officers to apply for promotion to warships, since they're doubling down in the Pacific. Morton can't possibly block this, right? But the notice came a few days too late because Doug made his deal and he can't go back on it now. Although after another week or two has passed, rumor has it that the war in Europe is over. And we won! Canada, Canada, and also USA, and also a lot of Europe, a lot of Europe. It wasn't just USA. Although these guys are American, I guess, right? Okay, fine. So while Roberts thought things were going to get worse, they're actually going to get better. Doug levels with the doc that he needs the medicine man to lie about something being physically wrong with him and get him transferred to the sick bay of a nearby island. Then when enough time passes and the bucket has to move on, he can get on some other boat. Wonder if in the military in this situation, the doctor outranks the captain, or his word does. And if he says, this man has to be with you to be taken care of for whatever the supposed problem is, can the captain overrule that, I wonder? Because Morton would figure out, he would know, Doug's lying. He's sandbagging, he's gold bricking. Back to the story here, Doug's mad too because the crew thinks his attitude change is just because he wants a promotion. And he's cheesed off that the ingrates think badly of him after all he's done for them. Of course, they don't know he did that, plus they're just trying to figure out why he's a changed man for the past few weeks. He's even putting some of his favorites on report for not working hard enough, so that has to confuse them. We thought you were one of the good commanding officers that let us loaf. Doc guesses that he sold out to the captain, and for a good reason, but Doug, of course, can't and won't admit it. When it's confirmed that Germany has surrendered and the war in Europe is in fact over, Doug gets over himself for a few minutes and perks up, telling Doc and Frank that they have to celebrate. After all, Doug is a good American first, and he's delighted for his country more than he's sad for his situation. Now, they don't have any booze, but Frank has that firecracker he talked about earlier. He wants to throw it under the old man's bunk, and that's good enough for Doug. But the joy of him doing that quickly fades when the ensign blows up the laundry while trying to make more firecrackers. It isn't that funny, but it's an obvious comic beat when the boat fills up with suds. They're trying to be funny here. It's amusing. Frank is just covered in them, and he comes back to their room with a huge smile on his face. It wasn't the specific trouble he wanted to get into, but he did make a scene and a mess, and the captain is cheesed about it. So it'll have to do, and the three of them are all giggles. I found Fonda's laughing here, and maybe the other guys too, a little bit forced. One of the few false notes in Fonda's performance. But they can't make any more firecrackers to do the bunk thing because all of Frank's supplies were down in the laundry, and now they're kaput. And turns out Doug is not satisfied with the sudsy situation, and he gets all patriotic when he hears Stars and Stripes Forever on the radio. So he marches up to the captain's palm tree and pitches it overboard into the drink. The petty little man loses his mind when he comes out to water it and sounds the general alarm, causing everybody to scramble because they think they're about to go into battle. But all he wanted was for everybody to stand there in their battle stations and sweat it out until the tree tosser confesses. When the men see that it is in fact gone, they quietly go nuts about it, doing a we're not worthy gesture to its former home on the deck, and screaming in joy, only doing it silently so Morton can't hear them. I guess they assume their former and once again hero is the one who did this, so he's back, baby! The captain figures out it was Doug too, and bellows over the intercom for him to get up there and face the music. But he somehow forgets the intercom is still on, and the crew overhears the dressing down he gives his XO, about the get me out of here letters, and about how the captain only gave the men leave because of their deal. But Cap pulls a Mo and chokes in his rage. I'm choking my own rage here. And seems to have had a mild heart attack or something. But it can't be too serious because the doc treats him briefly and then he leaves. Meanwhile, each member of the crew makes sure to bid Mr. Roberts good night, now that they know he's one of them after all. Well, as much as an officer can be, they do answer to him, even if they all want to act like he's just their buddy. I don't know how much time has passed, but the captain scores himself a new tree, and he's carefully watering it. Plus it's chained to the wall, and somebody says that it's got a 24-hour guard. I guess there's shades of Mutiny on the Bounty with those fruit, what are they called again? Breadfruit trees, right. Also a tough captain and an insubordinate crew. And what do you know? Doug does get orders to be assigned to another boat, a destroyer that's stationed in Okinawa. And he didn't even have to write a new letter to get this. The brass just came across some old letters they supposedly had in their files and decided Doug was their huckleberry, since they're desperate for a few good men. Wait, that's the Marines. A few good seamen. Well, anyway, Doc tries to convince Doug that the crew will miss him, but our man thinks they're too busy worrying about themselves to care if he leaves. But Doc announces that the "they found some old letters" thing isn't true. What happened was, the crew got together and auditioned John Hancock's to find out who the best man would be to forge the captain's signature, and then they sent the letter in without the old man knowing about it. It's pretty touching that the fellows just wanted to do something for Mr. Roberts, and they risked getting in serious trouble if Morton found out about it. We're talking about spending time in the brig, court-martial, all of that. Doug feels guilty about what he just said about them and confesses to the good doctor that he loves those guys and feels bad about leaving. Doc reveals that he's also figured out about the deal that got the crew liberty, even though Doug still won't admit it. They're interrupted by Frank coming in and sadly declaring that he's been given the job as the new cargo officer. The lazy man got a promotion to do the kind of job he certainly doesn't want to do. The 8 or 10 guys in the crew we've spent so much time with barge in with some homegrown booze and the gift of a palm tree attached to a ribbon. They call it the Order of the Palm. It's not an actual palm tree. It's they make it out of gold or silver or something like that. It's a little thing. So the Order of the Palm, they scrounged up these parts to create a medal the Navy would certainly never give him. Although I'm sure this means more to him than anything they would give him, meaning the brass. It's a lovely moment when Fonda's too moved by what they wrote on it to read it out loud, so he passes it over to Doc to do it for him. And before he heads out to his new assignment, he pins the palm tree medal to his pocket and salutes the dudes. So Doug is gone and some time has passed, as now Pulver's the one sweating through his Navy browns while coordinating the cargo movation, also finding out from the men that the captain has said there'll be no movie tonight because they were too loud or something. The mail arrives right then and they all crowd around to hear a letter Doug wrote to Frank. Doug's new boat is often under fire and times have been tough, which is what he always wanted though, yet he often finds himself missing Frank, Doc, and the guys too. The letter gets pretty sappy, but it's also quite sweet. This movie is more sweet than it is funny. Frank comes across another letter in the pile, though. This one's from a friend of his who happens to be serving on the same ship as Doug, and he lets Frank know that Mr. Roberts is dead. A Japanese pilot kamikazed his plane right into the boat, taking out Doug and another officer. I have to admit, this really nearly busted me up, just as it nearly busts all of them up. I just said it, and I'll say it again. This flick is more touching than it is hilarious. But we do need some comedy to end our comedy, so Pulver storms up to Morton's new tree, rips the chain right out of the wall, and throws that poor innocent palm overboard. The Pacific Ocean now has 2 trees it doesn't deserve, and never asked for. And then Frankie musters the verve to burst into the captain's room, rattle off that AFI-nominated quote about being "I, Ensign Pulver," and throwing the tree overboard, and what's all this crud about no movie tonight? Cagney gets a look on his face that says, "Oh no, not you too," while Lemmon tries to look tough, propping his foot up on the bed like he's John Wayne or something. And that's it. Movie over. Pulver never stood up to the captain while Doug was alive, but by George, he's going to start doing it now. As for Lemmon's last line, it isn't nearly as famous as the last lines in Some Like It Hot and The Apartment, neither of which Lemmon says anyway. But Nobody's Perfect and Shut Up and Deal were wonderful ways to end those films. Joey Brown and Shirley MacLaine said those things. Billy Wilder wrote 2 of the most famous parting shots, greatest parting shots ever, and he made the films in back-to-back years. And in this case, Jack is the one who gets to say it. And just like the one in Some Like It Hot, the comedy ends with a wisecrack on a boat. Oh, and about those 2 letters that Pulver reads at the end, from Doug and about Doug, that reminded me of something that might very well have been paying homage to this movie, and that's the TV series ER. Anthony Edwards as Mark Green is dying of cancer, and he sends an "I'm glad I knew you" letter to the hospital staff. Then his wife sends another one that lets them all know Mark has died. And Carter, who's ER's version of Pulver, I guess, tells a character named Frank to post the positive first letter on the bulletin board, not the second one about him being dead, which Pulver says to Dowdy and Mr. Roberts as well. That's a scene I've watched on YouTube plenty of times, and I bet the next time I do, I'll be picturing Hank Fonda in this movie as much as I'll be picturing Anthony Edwards. So the cast. Henry Fonda, who played this character on Broadway long before they made the movie and won a Tony Award for it, had been working in Hollywood for a long time before this. In fact, he made many movies before The Grapes of Wrath, which Ford also directed, but that was the first film of his that we ever covered. We've also reviewed some of the greatest and most rewatchable flicks of all time, and he was in all of these. The Lady Eve, 12 Angry Men, Once Upon a Time in the West, and then when he finally won an Oscar for On Golden Pond, which was his last film. We haven't formally reviewed The Oxbow Incident, but it's come up quite a few times in this channel, too, because it's great. This is far from his best work, but he is good in it. He flashes his great smile a lot, especially around the guys, and he's Henry Fonda, one of the true greats. But since he was about 50, is he too old to have played this character? I guess, but it never really occurred to me he was supposedly so old or too old until I was reading about that controversy afterwards. After all, the whole plot line here is that the Navy's desperate for qualified men to work on destroyers, and they needed whoever they could get during the war anyway, even just to man supply ships. So why is it so hard to believe they'd settle for an older man to either work on this old boat or make a difference on a battleship when they're desperate for more guys? In any case, the studio wanted Marlon Brando or William Holden instead, and those two were about as big as movie stars got in the mid-50s, so who wouldn't want to cast either of them? It's just that John Ford wanted Fonda, and I think old John tended to get his way. The AFI ranked Fonda 6th on the guys' side of the top 50 stars list, behind Bogart, Cary Grant, Brando, Jimmy Stewart, and this confounds me, Fred Astaire. Really? Fred Astaire got enough votes to end up 5th? I even take issue with Hank being ranked behind Cary Grant. Not that Cary and Fred aren't legends, and I do like them both, but higher than Fonda? In fact, as much as I admire those other 5 guys for their bodies of work, I'd rather watch Fonda's movies again over, I think, all of these guys. Maybe not It's a Wonderful Life from Stewart, but I watch 12 Angry Men probably once a year, and I've seen The Lady Eve twice since we covered it on the podcast about 9 years ago. Still very funny. That movie is so greatly funny. Fonda was a well-known liberal, which didn't stop him from being good friends with the right-leaning Jimmy Stewart, who I've learned in recent years wasn't Mr. Nice Guy the way his film image portrayed. For one thing, he spied on people he suspected might be communists, which had to have contributed to the Red Scare that got people blacklisted. That's a rotten thing to do, and for Jimmy Stewart to be part of that? I guess when these guys got together, they avoided talking about politics, and then they got along fine. You also have to admire both of them for anteing up and serving in the war. And they weren't token, hey, we got 2 famous actors to pretend to be soldiers and then send them out on PR missions or something. They both saw combat, and a lot of it. John Wayne didn't do anything like that chicken hawk. Yet despite his great career and his impeccable military record, I read years ago that Henry Fonda was, well, not blacklisted, but graylisted, which is one reason why he didn't work in a movie for 6 or 7 years. He did stage stuff instead, and that was from the late 40s until he did this film. But at least he did get back to acting regularly for about 25 years after he made the comeback in this. And yet, fantastic career or not, the man was only ever nominated for 3 Academy Awards and only 2 for acting, which were 41 years apart. The Grapes of Wrath, and then On Golden Pond. Apart from all those wonderful films he made, his great legacy is that he was Jane and Peter's dad and Bridget's grandfather. That's a dynasty. Oh, wait, and one of Jane's kids, Troy Garrity, I think is his name. He's acting too, or I think he's still acting now. He has been acting. Well, speaking of Jane, bit of a rant coming here. I mentioned the top 50 stars list. You've probably heard me say this before, but here we go again. One reason I think that whole stars list is bogus is that to qualify, you had to be dead or start acting in movies before 1950, which means that Jane Fonda wasn't eligible, and neither was Jack Lemmon for that matter. If you want to have a serious greatest actors list and not have both of them on it, never mind Nicholson, Pacino, De Niro, Hoffman, Hackman, Newman, Freeman, Denzel, Streep, Winslet, Blanchett, Kidman, and so many others, then it's not a serious list. But as for the Fonda family and that legacy, even though Hank so often played noble and decent men, he wasn't always so noble in reality. I think I read years ago that he often cheated on his many wives. One of them even killed herself because he just wasn't a very good husband. I think it was actually Peter and Jane's mom. And he had a rocky relationship with his progeny, I think all through their young lives at least. Bev and I talked about all that when we covered On Golden Pond several years ago, that he and Jane had made up by then. I think she said that. Yet even so, she was still working through her issues with her pop during the production. The scene where she says she wants to be his friend and touches his arm went beyond the characters they were playing, and it caused Henry to start crying a little, which he would normally never do, unless I guess the scene called for it. I don't think he cried on screen very much, though. He's touched in that one scene in this movie, and I think he's supposed to be almost going to tears when they give him the medal, and he can't read it. Doc has to read it. But I don't think Henry Fonda's the kind of guy that was ever... He was a pro, right? The kind of guy that wouldn't ever break on camera in any sort of way. He wouldn't laugh when he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't going to cry when he wasn't supposed to. She caught him off guard, and it's one of the best moments in that whole film. So I think he's just about as good an actor as there ever was. I still say Brando is literally the greatest I've ever seen, and my favorites are people like Nicholson and Hanks and 45,000 others. But of the old-timers, considering star power and range and believability and connecting with the audience, my number one used to be Stewart. Now it's Fonda. It's a Wonderful Life is outside of all that. That's too special. That one's a better film than anything that Fonda made, I think. I watch it every single Christmas. Okay, moving on now. Jimmy Cagney made his name in the 30s working with the studio that made this film, Warner Brothers, including The Public Enemy, which we looked at a few years ago. That was his big breakout in Hollywood, and it might be the one people always identify him with. Jim's only AFI movie was Yankee Doodle Dandy, a musical, of course. He won an Oscar for that. He's also tremendous in White Heat, a film I've raved about so many times. So I guess this makes 4 Cagney motion pictures on this channel. Jimmy was the president of the Screen Actors Guild for a couple years in the early 40s, which ironically was when Fonda was winning citations and a Bronze Star during World War II as a lieutenant in the Navy. Lieutenant Doug, Lieutenant Hank. One guy made movies about the war over there, while the other just quietly helped win it. As for the Captain Morton character, it's interesting that this movie came out in 1955, because that was only a year after Bogart so memorably played Captain Queeg in the Caine Mutiny. He was terrific in that. He was nominated. There you've got a ship captain who just doesn't have it anymore, and maybe Captain Morton in this never did, and other people are making him look better than he actually is. Plus both captains are hard-driving pricks who don't appreciate the men working under them. And you get one classic actor known best for playing gangsters in the 30s and 40s in charge of men on a boat, the year before another classic actor from the 30s and 40s was best known for playing gangsters being in charge of men on a boat. William Powell was in movies for over 30 years, but this was his last one, and he was only in his early 60s when he hung him up. This was a tough shoot on him, though, especially dealing with the heat when they were on location in Hawaii and at Midway. Plus, he was having enough health troubles that he couldn't remember some of his lines. So even though he lived about 30 more years, he said, enough is enough. I respect that. I'm done. I don't need to do this until I'm 98 years old. Powell had played Nick in the Thin Man series, the first of which I reviewed last year. Bev and I also talked about his work in My Man Godfrey several years ago, so I guess this is movie number 3 for him. Jack Lemmon's come up so many times on Have You Ever Seen? This was early in his career, but he went on to do legendary work in Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, The Odd Couple, The China Syndrome, along with Grumpy Old Men and Shortcuts. We've covered all of those. Chris and I also reviewed him in his final film as the narrator in The Legend of Bagger Vance. He's also briefly on camera in that movie. Those are all good to great titles, so we've chosen wisely when it comes to Jack's movies. You chose wisely. When he won that second Oscar, by the way, for Save the Tiger, he beat out Brando, Nicholson, Pacino, and Redford. Wow. It is nice to see a comic performance like this one win an Oscar, even if it's a little bit shticky, and he doesn't do any pointing, I noticed. I was thinking about this about 20 minutes ago before I sat down to record. That he doesn't do the Jack Lemmon pointing thing he was best known for, type of thing. It is odd that this and Save the Tiger got him trophies, though, because he wasn't rewarded for Some Like It Hot, or The Apartment, or The China Syndrome. He was nominated for all those. And I would say Glengarry Glen Ross, where he wasn't nominated, where maybe he's had his absolute best ever. Those performances stomped this one and even Save the Tiger into the dust. But then again, look how often people win Oscars for the wrong movies. He ended up getting 8 nominations in total, many of them for his work in the films I just mentioned, which was 6 more than Fonda had. Well, as an actor anyway. Fonda had that one for producing 12 Angry Men. Oh, and here's a nice connection to the 2 actors as well. They both played juror number 8 in 12 Angry Men. Lemmon played the character in a TV movie. That's that whole thing with Ving Rhames. I give my award to Jack Lemmon. I respect him. Lemmon had been in that, and Rhames had played Don King maybe or something in some TV movie. And Lemmon didn't actually win, but Rhames gave him his award for his performance in the 12 Angry Men TV movie. And Lemmon also did like Fonda and served in the Navy during World War II. In recent years, I've taken a little issue with how everyone always compares Tom Hanks to Jimmy Stewart, especially in their everymanness. Well, it's not like it's wrong to say that, but the comparison is better with Fonda, and even with Lemmon. All 4 of them, including Stewart, are actors who were good at both comedy and drama, and they also came off as the kinds of guys we'd like if we knew them as people, just regular people, and we'd consider them our friends if we ever got to know them. Even if that's not true, it feels true, doesn't it? They were believable in things like romances, biopics, war films, but Hanks, being called the modern Jimmy Stewart, is a bit reductive. At this point in my life, I prefer Fonda and even Lemmon as an actor to old Jimmy. Of course, it's not like I think Stu sucks or anything, but I just think that Hanks compares better to Fonda or Lemmon. Betsy Palmer plays Anne Gerard, but her most famous role is not this, or any other reputable movie she made. No, it's the disreputable Friday the 13th, where she plays Mrs. Voorhees, which I reviewed a few years ago. Palmer hadn't been in movies for over 20 years when she played the original killer of Crystal Lake, although she worked in television quite a bit throughout her career. So all through the 70s, I believe, she was making TV shows, and the 60s as well. She'd been in about 8 movies before Friday the 13th and something like 6 after it. And one of those 8 was a 50s Western called The Tin Star, which co-starred Henry Fonda. Ward Bond does what he pretty much always did in his career, play a second banana. His biggest claim to fame on this channel is that he acted in more AFI movies than anybody. There was 7, and those 7 were It Happened One Night, Bringing Up Baby, Gone with the Wind, The Grapes of Wrath, The Maltese Falcon, It's a Wonderful Life, and The Searchers. He's barely in some of those, but they do count. He also had supporting roles in The Informer, You Can't Take It With You, The Quiet Man, and Rio Bravo. So this makes movie number 12 for the Wardster on this podcast. I could highlight the guys who play the rest of the crew. I think Harry Carey Jr. is one of them. I don't remember who he even was. But let's move on to their director, or directors, John Ford and Mervyn LeRoy, with Joshua Logan doing some directing on this too, although he was uncredited. Merv produced The Wizard of Oz and also directed Edward G. Robinson and Little Caesar. Both of those movies have been reviewed and are in our archives. But it is weird he shares credit with Ford on this. Why? Well, the story goes that Ford was indisposed because he was blackout drunk during some of the shoot. I don't know if Sam Peckinpah idolized or tried to emulate Ford in his own filmmaking, but he had that in common. I'll get so drunk that I can barely even go to work in the morning. Now, Ford being too drunk to work was a story I always heard about why he and LeRoy share credit, but I also got reading a few days ago about how he punched Fonda in the face and it essentially got him fired. They just didn't actually fire him or make it public that he was effectively gone. Maybe so he could save face. I guess he and Fonda battled on how Hank was playing the character he already knew so well from doing it on the stage. I disagree with your take, so now I'm going to cuff you in the teeth for it. I guess several people in this production came away hating they were ever part of it, including the director and his star. Cagney wasn't a John fan either. They had their issues as well. And I think this makes 8 Ford flicks on this channel at this point. The Informer, Stagecoach, The Grapes of Wrath, The Quiet Man, Mogambo, The Searchers, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance are the others. The Admiral took home 4 Oscars, including for The Informer, which I reviewed just a few months ago. And what I discovered doing research for that podcast is that he only ever had 2 failed Oscar nominations for directing Stagecoach and producing The Quiet Man, so he was 4 for 6. And some irony about a fellow great director, Orson Welles, is that he revered Stagecoach and made it his Bible when he was preparing to make Citizen Kane. So I don't think he had a vote in 1940 for the 1939 movies, but if he did, he would certainly have voted for Ford in that, the one time he didn't win when he was nominated for Best Director. Ford, of course, is one of the greats, but a zany war comedy was an unusual project for him, and I don't think the movie's all that funny, as I said many times. Maybe because they got the wrong people to direct it. Not just one guy, but the wrong guys. He mostly directed westerns or films with Irish themes, and I called him Admiral a minute ago because he, like Lemmon and Fonda, served in the Navy. He was a rear admiral at the end of his time in the Navy Reserves. I suppose that could be one reason he was such a drinker and could be such a prick to his actors. Maybe he was haunted by PTSD about the war he saw. I think he was involved in Korea as well, but definitely World War II, and then couldn't get over it. So he took it out on the silly Hollywood people. Great director, but what an a-hole. Although to take that out on a guy like Fonda baffles me, considering he would have respected his war record, and he was, of course, a great actor. Apparently the old man tried to make amends, but they didn't work together again, even though Fonda had been in quite a few of his flicks in the 10 or 15 years before this came out. And of course, one of those was The Grapes of Wrath. Another one was My Darling Clementine, one of the many adaptations of the Wyatt Earp story. The direction here, by the way, no matter who specifically did what between him, LeRoy, and Logan, is very good. I liked how he, or maybe they, let the actors play scenes in long takes, especially the scenes in Cagney's quarters, or even more so the ones in Fonda and Lemmon's quarters. The film is a bit long, at a touch over 2 hours, but I don't think it has a rocky pace. I'd say it's solidly paced at least. I wasn't bored or anything watching this. Oh, and speaking of watching this a few days ago, I always tell you about some of Bev's thoughts if she watches a movie with me, but she didn't watch this one because she was away on vacation at a friend's cottage while I was sitting down to see Mr. Roberts, which I don't think she's ever seen. Josh Logan and Frank Nugent shared screenplay credit. They based it on the 1946 novel and, of course, the play that started its run in 1948. Logan was involved in that stage play while another real-life Navy man, Thomas Hagen, wrote the book and then turned it into the play, which I guess was more serious, and the captain was a harder prick than he is in the movie. So maybe more like a Queeg type, or even a Bligh. As for Logan's career, he was known as more of a theater man. He only wrote a handful of other scripts, but he did direct 10 other films, including some notable ones in just the next few years: Picnic, Bus Stop, and South Pacific. Nugent was a Ford guy. Something like half of his scripts were for Ford films, including putting pen to paper for The Quiet Man and The Searchers. I guess because this made such a fortune, they followed it up with a TV series in the mid-60s. Took a long time to get that going, though, didn't it? 55 to mid-60s. I can do math. It only lasted 1 season, though. And Josh Logan was given the assignment of directing a big screen sequel called Ensign Pulver in, I think, 64? Just about nobody from Mr. Roberts was in that, though, with Robert Walker Jr. playing Frank, Burl Ives playing the captain, and Walter Matthau is the doctor. Jack Nicholson's in it, though, too. He has a small role about 5 years before he hit it big, and Easy Rider. He was in movies for about a decade before he did Easy Rider and finally became a star. Leland Hayward produced this. He was like Logan and was better known as a stage guy. He only had 2 other big screen production credits, but they were big titles that came out soon after this did. The Spirit of St. Louis with Jimmy Stewart, and The Old Man and the Sea with Spencer Tracy. Not a fan of that one, but it was a big title. Winton Hoke shot the 2.55:1 CinemaScope color picture. He was nominated for 3 Oscars and won all 3 times, including for The Quiet Man and another Ford flick, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Beyond those, a very big title on his resume is The Searchers. If this was a good print, I'm sure I'd be complimenting Hoke's work, but it's hard to do that when the TCM print turned out to be so horrible. It felt like they were showing a VHS copy. After about 10 minutes of that, I gave up and popped in the DVD that I owned, hoping it would look better, but nope, it was the same thing. So I can't even blame TCM for going with something so inferior, when that's what I would have been watching if I had started with the DVD in the first place. Maybe there isn't enough demand for a 70-year-old movie, but this needs a 4K upgrade very badly. The cutter Jack Murray was also a Ford guy. After working constantly through the 30s, he started working with Ford on, I say these ones again, The Quiet Man and The Searchers, but also Howard Hawks' Red River. The legendary Franz Waxman composed the music, and Mr. Roberts, he won 2 Gold Naked Guys in a row in 1950 and 1951 for Sunset Boulevard's score and for The Place in the Sun score. A Place in the Sun, not The Place in the Sun. Waxman was involved in the tunes for the following classics: Bride of Frankenstein, The Philadelphia Story, Rebecca, To Have and Have Not, Stalag 17, and Rear Window, and we reviewed all of those, including, of course, Sunset Boulevard and A Place in the Sun. My fan's going again on my computer. Holy crap. Well, I continue to highly enjoy Mr. Roberts. This was something like the 4th time I've seen it. It's a good story. It's more enjoyable than truly laughy, though. I was often very touched by Fonda's Get Me Out of Here plotline, especially at the end with that palm medal and then when they find out he died. He's just really good and so human. Cagney and Powell were old pros and they're rock solid. Lemmon went over the top, but he's likable. So it's maybe not my favorite film of 1955 anymore, but it remains a fun time and it's worth your 2 hours. So that was how I saw Mr. Roberts. I've got a few trivia questions for you before I get to our contact information and tell you what's coming up on this channel in the weeks ahead. Oh, and there's no theme to these ones this time, just 3 random movie questions. So number 1, Shazam is actually an acronym. It stands for something. So what are the 6 words that make up SHAZAM? Z-I-M Canadian, not Z. Question number 2, what's the call sign of the guy played by Tim Robbins in Top Gun? Oh, I guess that one is thematic because they're Navy guys too, like the people in this movie. And question number 3, who played Juliet's fiancé? That's my fiancé. Dave Paris in Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet movie in 1996. Okay, stay tuned for those answers, but first I must tell you that Bev will return next week and we'll be reviewing Living in Oblivion. Steve Buscemi has not gotten to be the leading character in movies very often, but when he does, it tends to be in independent movies once he makes himself, or in this case, Tom DeSillo's satire on movie making. And by the way, the coming attractions opinion question is something about, what is it again? If you worked on an independent film, what job would you want that's not, say, the director or the star or the writer? Some of the lower end jobs. That's the question that we'll be talking about next week. Opinion question, not a trivia question, though. All right, contact information and such. Did you enjoy this episode? Well, let us know by giving us a 5-star rating in your podcast app. Be like that bird out there and screech at me. Write a review, too. We post all these shows on YouTube, of course, and you can comment and like the show on that site as well. Subscribe in both locations too, man. Subscribe. The location on the tube is at HYES Ellis in the search bar. You can also email us, haveyouverirseenpodcast@gmail.com. On the social stuff, I'm at MovieFiend51 on Twix and Ryan-Ellis on Blue Sky, while Bev is at Bev Ellis on the T and just Bev Ellis, no at, on the B. And look up the Sparkplug Coffee website. It's sparkplug.coffee/HYES. They'll give you a 20% discount if you pop our HYES promo code into the right place, and that's a one-time only offer. All right, the answers to those trivia questions. So number 1, Shazam is actually an acronym. What are the 6 words that make up SHAZAM? There, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury. That one's pretty tough, unless you're a huge Shazam fan. Question number 2. What's the call sign of the guy played by Tim Robbins in Top Gun? It's Merlin, who rides with Cougar in the beginning of the movie. Then he's Maverick's Rio. I thought they were saying Rear, but Rio, R-I-O, at the end. I'm bringing him in closer, Merlin. You're going to do what? I love, too, that Tim Robbins is behind Tom Cruise. He's about 8 feet taller than Cruise. And question number 3. Who played Juliet's fiancé, Dave Paris, in Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet movie in 1996? A pre-stardom Paul Rudd got to be the jilted intended of Miss Capulet. And that's that. Thanks very much for hearing me say some words about Mr. Roberts. A lot of words, maybe too many words. Join us next week when we offer our opinions about Living in Oblivion, another comedy here in our comedy month of July. Meanwhile, I'm going to go see if I can't get transferred to a better job. The less time I spend with that dirty rat, the better. I cannot do Cagney. And cut.